All right, there we are. We're going with that. So put in the chat if you have experience with FMEAs. Yep, FMEA and Ossium both good. You perform FMEA, yes, FMEA. Okay, so for any of you who don't know what an FMEA is, it's basically a failure modes and effects analysis where you write functions for your equipment. So you identify what you need your equipment to do, and then you identify what the failure causes are, what would specifically cause you, for example, not to get the output from your compressor that you need. And then you write a failure effect. Well, oftentimes this is done as a matter of course, right? Like, well, I'm going to show you. So let's look at an example of a failure effect that a failure effect that I would facilitate and I would write. And I have to stop and tell you this also, that I was really inspired by this topic because just in the last couple of weeks, I have been mentoring one of my facilitator students online. She is facilitating her first Rcm analysis. And as I was mentoring her, we were talking more about the people, her working group members, and how to handle them and how to ask questions to get information from them. And that's what sparked me about this live. So let me share with you what I mean. So let's say you're doing an analysis on a compressor. And let's say that the failure mode, and when I use the term failure mode, I'm talking about a failure cause, or what specifically causes functional failure. I personally use those two terms interchangeably. So let's say you've got a failure mode, and we're going to go simple today. We're going to use some simple examples. Let's say compressor intake air filters clog due to normal use, right? So a lot of times in some FMEAs, it would just say like, okay, filter clogs, compressor shuts down, downstream process stops. Well, I mean, there could be some value in that, but if that's the level of detail that's being written, there's a big opportunity that's being missed. So let me show you. So this is how I would facilitate a failure effect to be written. Over time, the filters clog and is visually detectable. If this goes unnoticed, there is restricted airflow to the motor and the motor is suffocated. Main electric motor winding temperature increases. The DCS displays the elevated winding temperature via temperature element 6319, 2, or 3, depending upon what phase we're talking about. If this goes unnoticed, eventually the motor winding temperature reaches 240 degrees, and the high motor winding temp light illuminates with a solid light, and an advisory alarm is generated on the DCS. So you can see that as we're writing this failure effect, we're building it. We're talking about the way I like to think about a failure effect is that we're on a slide. And I want to pause for a second and just make sure I'm not droning on and on here. Can you still just put a yes in the chat if you can still see and hear me? Oh, yes, I was supposed to be sharing something. Okay, thank you. Yep, I messed up there. All right, I'm sharing my screen. Golly, can you see it now, guys? Can you see my screen now? Yes, okay, so you can see it now? Okay, good. All right, so this is what I was reading to you. So when I develop a failure effect, I think about it like I'm on a slide. Do you remember when you were a kid and you go to the playground and you climb up the ladder and you're at the top of the slide and then you come down and you land at the end? Well, that's what I have in my mind when I'm facilitating a failure effect, right? So this is what I just read to you. So you can see where I don't just go from, okay, filter clogs and the compressor shuts down. I'm building it. I'm detailing what's happening, right? So I'm talking about that debris starts to collect. It's visually detectable. But if that goes unnoticed, now the motor is going to be suffocated. Winding temperatures increase. Now we get some clues that this failure is in the process of happening, right? The DCS displays the elevated winding temperature. And if that goes unnoticed, Eventually, winding temperature increases to the point where we get an advisory alarm on the DCS if we're looking, right? Now let's finish the rest of it. So now the filters are replaced while the compressor is running. So this is a nice clue. This clues us in and reminds everyone that we don't have to actually shut down the process to replace the filters. However, worst case, if the DCS advisory goes unnoticed and the operating temperature is close to the motor winding interlock, then the operating temperature reaches the motor winding interlock set point of 265 degrees. The high motor winding temp light starts to flash, the PLC trips the main electric motor, and the compressor shuts down. There's inadequate plant air to support the downstream process, production stops, at least 1,000 pounds of product must be scrapped at a cost of $100,000. The filter is replaced, downtime to repair 6 hours. So you can see how we started at the top of the slide and we went all the way down. But look at all of this information that is contained within this failure effect. See, when you write a failure effect this way, you are able to collect information that is hugely valuable, even outside of coming up with effective maintenance policies. So here you see on this bullet, the failure effect outlines why it's important to monitor for the alarms, and it teaches the failure process. Now, I've been facilitating for over 20 years, and it's inevitably the people in the room, the equipment experts like the maintainers and the operators, they inevitably learn about their equipment, but here's why. If you're doing a facilitated working group approach to reliability-centered maintenance, or I will say, let me pause and say this live is not about reliability-centered maintenance, but I speak from that perspective because that is my expertise. And that is exactly what your equipment experts do. And that is what is very important to realize, that when you are analyzing a piece of equipment, if you have just the reliability engineer, for example, preparing a failure modes and effects analysis, well, only his perspective is going to be captured in that FMEA. Now, there's no one on the planet who knows everything about a piece of equipment, right? So when you get an operator involved and a maintainer involved, and then you've got the reliability engineer, sometimes depending upon the analysis that you might do, you might have the design engineer in on it. You might have a logistician in because you might know that you're going to happen upon a lot of maybe tech manual changes, and you want the person responsible for that in the room. So you have all of these people and they have all of these different perspectives. So they contribute to the information that gets put into that failure effect. But a byproduct of that is that everyone learns about it. So if you see here, like in analyses that I have facilitated, you learn here, okay, why is it important to monitor the alarm? Because how many times do we have a control panel with lights or, a DCS, and we're getting these messages or we're getting lights, and maybe they're often lit. So people just, people get complacent, and not because the people are bad, because they don't really understand why they should be looking at something or what they should be looking about. So this outlines the failure process and it highlights why it is important, right? So here, see, we start to get just the advisory on the DCS and we get a solid light. But then as the temperature starts to increase, right, now the light starts to flash, and then when we get to a certain point, the PLC automatically shuts the compressor down. So you see that you get all of this valuable information. I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. But another thing that it does, can you put in the chat if you can still see my slides and you can still see and hear me? Just put a yes, just so I know. Yes. Okay, good. All right. See, it also details why it makes a difference if the alarm goes unnoticed, because a lot of times in our environments, you know, like I said, the light lights or it's flashing or you hear this or you see that and people just silence it because they don't really understand why and what's going on. Now, the meat that I want to get into, and it's going to answer a couple of the questions that were emailed ahead of time, is I want to talk about on-condition maintenance and P2f intervals. Now, if you're saying to yourself, well, I thought this was about people and our most valuable asset, well, it is. And this is exactly why we have to make sure that we get from our equipment experts what we need. So if you don't already know what a P2f interval is, let me just very quickly introduce it again, right? So the x-axis is time, as you can see here. Now, time can be measured in any number of in any number of units. It could be calendar time, it could be miles, it could be operating hours, it could be cycles. It doesn't matter what it is, right? And the y-axis is the resistance to failure. So in a nutshell, basically, let's say we install a new component and a certain amount of time goes by because we live in the real world and degradation happens. Everything degrades over time. And eventually we see potential failure conditions, right? We could use our human senses and we could hear vibration, we could feel it. We can use sophisticated vibration monitoring equipment. We could use thermography to monitor for temperature. We can do continuous monitoring with sophisticated devices installed on our machines. Whatever it is, there's going to be a potential failure condition. And if we're not on the lookout for it and we ignore it, well, then eventually functional failure happens. Whatever that means to us, failure occurs. Well, the time between when a potential failure condition is detectable to the point where functional failure occurs, that's called the P2f interval. Now, figuring out these values, how do we know what our potential failure conditions are? How do we know what the P2f interval is? That's where our equipment experts come in. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for 1 second. Because remember we talked about our people, that there's a technical side and there's a human side. Well, when it comes to our equipment experts, and it can be our technicians, our operators, our engineers, like I said, our logisticians, our managers, everyone who has something to do with reliability. That's what I'm talking about them, right? So here we go. We have our person. But inside everybody's brain is all of this good stuff that they know, right? They know the equipment. They know the operating environment. They know the operational tempo. They understand that. They understand the equipment, how it fails, what specifically causes it to fail, what happens when it fails, and how each failure even matters, right? So this is why I say they are our most valuable resource. Yeah, I mean, we've got tech manuals, right? We have manuals we could look up online and look at stuff, but the stuff that's inside the brains of our equipment experts is pure gold. And in my experience, it is the most often overlooked and underutilized resource in our industry. And I think that is so for a couple of reasons, which we're going to get to. But now let's get back. I want to get back to the P2f interval. So I'm going to share my screen again. So tell me if you can see it. Just put in the chat just to make sure. I don't want to have functional failures going on and you can't see me. Okay, yes. All right, good. So back to our P2f interval, right? And we're gonna start off simple. We're gonna stay with our intake air filter, right? So let's take our air filter as an example. Well, we know, we know our equipment experts say that in this operating environment, in this operating context, it's possible to visually inspect the filter for signs of debris. Now, are there other indications? Maybe there's a differential pressure gauge. There could be a whole host of other reasons. And that's another reason why it's so important that you have your equipment experts there. Just for our example purposes, let's just focus on visual signs of debris, right? That is our potential failure condition. Now, I want to remind you that we're here. Let's say we install a new filter right here, and a certain amount of time goes by. We don't care. I'm not interested in what that time interval is. I'm interested in this time interval. From the point where it is possible, if I were to look to visually detect signs of debris, to the point where I get the DCS advisory alarm at 240 degrees, I want to know how long that takes. Now, let's step back for a second, because this is why it's so important that, number one, you know the right questions to ask your equipment experts, and number two, that you ask them. Because failure is subjective, right? We could have a whole bunch of different failures here. Here, this is just when the DCS advisory alarm comes on, because I know that when that advisory comes on, there's a solid light, right? And I know that it's not going to go like within seconds. If it was seconds, I would have written that in my failure effect, right? Within seconds, the compressor shuts down. So I know that I've got a certain amount of time between when the DCS advisory alarm is indicated and the point where the compressor actually shuts down. So I could have that as a failure. If I wanted, I could say compressor shuts down, but I want to head it off at the pass, right? My mentor, John Mowbray, taught me that reliability-centered maintenance, the essence of it is managing the consequences of failure. And that's what we do with maintenance, right? So if the way we want to manage these consequences is to avoid it shutting down, then we want to catch it before we get the DCS advisory alarm. So if I'm asking my team, what I would say to my team is, okay, guys, how long between the time that you can visually detect the debris to the point that the alarm would go off, right? Oh, and here's what they're going to say. Oh, I don't know. That's probably the first thing they're going to say. Now, here's why it's very important to be able to know how to ask them the right questions. And this is one of the things, this is why I got this inspiration for this live, because I was going over this with my student. And when we were talking before she was going to restart for the next day, she said, they keep telling me that they don't know. So here's a trick. This is what I always do. I start with something facetious and I say something like, okay, John, I see you raised your hand. I'll get to you in 1 second. I'll start with something facetious and something stupid. And I'll say, okay, guys, well, is it about 10 years? And then they'll say, oh, no, it's not 10 years. And I said, well, is it on the order of years? No. Could it go a month? No. Could it go a week? No, it couldn't go a week. And then someone might say, well, usually I install them and I have to change them about every 2 weeks. But you see, you have to know that they're answering a different question, because you're asking from the point where the visual signs of debris are detectable to the point that the alarm is indicated. So you get them back on track with that. And you finally get them down where they might say 2 days. Okay, so based upon that now, you know that when you get to assigning your on-condition maintenance task, because that's what this is, right? I use the synonym condition-based maintenance to mean the same thing as on-condition maintenance, then you know you're going to have to inspect, say, the general rule of thumb is to cut the P2f interval in half. So let's go with that for example purposes. Then you know you're going to have to visually inspect on rounds every day to see if there are signs of debris. Now, does that mean that every day you're going to find debris? No, it doesn't. But you have to inspect at least once a day. Otherwise, you might miss the failure. See, when it comes to on-condition maintenance, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. When it comes to on-condition maintenance, or CBM, it doesn't matter how often failure occurs. What matters is how quickly failure occurs once the potential failure condition is detectable. So it's very important that you're asking your equipment experts the right questions. Now, here's the thing. I get asked often, well, how do you figure out what P2f intervals how do you figure out what the potential failure conditions are and what the P2f intervals are? But that's where your equipment experts come in, right? That's where they have the information in their brain. So I'm going to pause for a second because let's see, I'm going to check for questions. John, let me see, I'm going to check the chat, but John, put your question, if you did have a question, put it in the question pot. Or never mind, it's in the chat. If the DCM alarm, let me read this for a second. Yes, okay, yeah, exactly, John. So yes, I guess I answered your question. I answered your question before you asked it. So yes, what John's question was, if the DCS alarm is an early warning and allows enough time to change the filter, can it be used as the potential failure condition? Absolutely. So now what you do is in your rounds, okay, so you can either visually inspect the filter, or like what John is saying, maybe we want to change this and we just want to monitor it by the DCS advisory alarm. So maybe then just monitor the temperature. If you know at what temperature it's going to shut down, then that would then this would be the DCS. This wouldn't be the DCS advisory alarm. We would assign this a different temperature. I don't know, maybe like 230 degrees. And so instead, we could have the operator or the person who's operating at the panel, we could have that person be monitoring that. Now, you might want to have both happen, right? Maybe you want to have the operator that he, every day puts on maybe his sheet that he has checked those temperatures, but also maybe you want to have someone visually looking. And it would depend on a whole bunch of issues, maybe how serious the consequences of the failure are, for example. Okay, I'm going to pause and just see if there was anything else in the chat. Okay, so Karen Kumar asked, how did you conclude 2 days P2f interval for this example? I asked my equipment experts, because they know the operating environment. They know how long it's going to take from the point that debris starts to get collected in there to the point that it gets collected so much that my winding temperature is going to increase. That's why our people are our most valuable asset. I personally have never come upon an organization that had all of this P2f interval data in a database. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but to a large degree, it doesn't. So that doesn't mean that we're strangled or that we have to be frozen in place and we can't move forward, because we have so much vital information when it comes to our working group members. Okay, I'm looking in the chat. Okay, another question was, what is the dominant failure mode? Okay, excellent. I love this question, because when I teach reliability-centered maintenance and when I teach facilitators, the golden question that you want to ask is this. A lot of people say, well, how does it fail? Why does it fail? But this is the golden question, okay? I'm going to stop sharing so you can see my screen, my sheet here. Okay. Golden question. What specifically causes, and then you fill in the blank, right? When you ask people, if you say, why did that happen? It's kind of vague, right? Like, why did it happen? Well, I don't know why it happened. But when you use this question and you put in the words specifically, there's something like, it's like a mental hanger for people, or it's something like that they can latch on to mentally when you ask them, what specifically caused the electric motor to shut down? What specifically caused the seal to fail, right? So when you ask that in this way, it's just psychologically or mentally a much easier way to get people's minds wrapped around this stuff. Okay, I'm looking in the chat again. Would you call it condition-based maintenance or predictive maintenance? Okay, Loic, I personally consider them the same. And I know that there are a lot of people, there are nuances. There are nuances between the two. For me, I use them interchangeably. It just means you do maintenance based upon evidence of need. And that evidence is your potential failure condition. We are hearing a term in our world now. You may have read or hear the term prescriptive maintenance. And this is where you outfit your machines with sophisticated devices, and based upon the pre-programmed recording or the thresholds, it'll actually spit out a work order and say, okay, you have to go do this, or you have to check that. So that's prescriptive maintenance, and all that is great. But I think a big problem in our industry right now is, I think that the first place to go is with technology, right? People are looking for the shiny object, things to make things easy. And it's not just in our industry, it's like even in our own lives, where we think that an expensive device or a sophisticated piece of software can solve our reliability problems. And they most certainly can help, but we need to be really smart about it. And we need to especially make sure, you know, my mentor taught me that we manage physical assets at the failure mode level, or the failure cause level, right? So before we go out and buy all this stuff, we need to know what it is that we're managing. And we need to manage our equipment with what we have right now. So we need to be able to manage those failure modes right now before we start with, you know, buying like a sophisticated piece of equipment, because that could take a couple of months to implement, right? Okay, Khalid, no, it's kind of what I mean by human, but I'm getting to human, so stick with me. What does exactly detectability signifies in RPN number? Does it mean PDM techniques or different tags present? Okay, so I think that this person is talking about a risk priority number, which is basically assessing consequences. So stay tuned on that one, because I'm going to talk about that. Working environment, poor manufacturing of air filters, poor maintenance or operating conditions, 100%. Now, this is another reason why it is so important that we have our equipment experts involved in our improvement efforts, right? It doesn't even have to be Rcm. It doesn't matter what it is that you're doing. We have to bring them into the fold, because they know where these vulnerabilities lay, right? They know if an operating procedure is too vague, right? They know if they don't have the right tool. Now, a lot of these people have been in the field for 10, 20, 30 years, right? So they've developed their own workarounds. But what happens is when new people come in, they're not clued into that. And so some of these things can lead to disaster. I mean, you know, is a fatal disaster is likely to happen? Well, I mean, most of them are very unlikely, right? But we could just pull up a news channel right now, and we could read about explosions, you know, people dying because of equipment that fails, and not necessarily just equipment, but because someone was trying to do something and it was hard for them to get in there, and, you know, maybe they like lose a finger or something like that. So that's another reason why it's so important to pull them in. Okay, what is the difference between failure mode in Rcm and FMEA? Okay, I get asked this often. there's no difference between FMEA and Rcm. If you're doing reliability-centered maintenance, let me get my pad. If you're doing reliability-centered maintenance, then you are automatically doing FMEA, a failure modes and effects analysis. You are automatically doing a Fmea or a failure modes, effects, and criticality analysis. And you are also already considering condition-based maintenance, right? Steps 1 through 4 of the Lcm process make up the Fmea: functions, functional failures, failure modes, failure effects. Step 5 is we assess consequences of each failure mode. That makes up the C in Fmea. And in step 6, we consider if there's any kind of proactive maintenance that's technically the right thing to do, and is it worth doing it? That is included in step 6, condition-based maintenance. It also includes, we hear this today all the time, oh brother, optimizing maintenance. Optimizing maintenance, I'm going to get to that in a minute. When you do Ossium, you also optimize your maintenance. Okay, I'm just looking at the chat to see if there are any other questions. Okay, all the other questions so far, I'm going to get to in the other stuff that I have prepared. So let's go and let me check the Q&A. Okay, Khalid asked, does this mean you will depend on the human? I think to a large degree, we have to depend on human beings. Certainly not entirely, but I mean, people take care of our machines. So to a large degree, when the operator is out there and when the technician is out there, well, you know, we depend on them to do it right. But now likewise, our people in the field depend on our managers. They depend on them to make sure they have the right tools that they need, to make sure that the operating procedures are written detailed enough, that we give them the proper opportunity for training. And, you know, a lot of that stuff is often overlooked in our industry. And that's not a dig on our industry or anyone in it, because we live in the real world, right? If we want perfection, I tell this to my husband all the time, you know, he'll come home from work and he'll say, thus and so happened, and it's just not fair. And I look at him and I say, well, if you want fair, you're going to have to move to fantasy land, right? Because we live in the real world. So we're not looking for perfection. We're just looking to do the best we can. And if we are going to do the best we can, then we have to use all of our resources. And that means our people. Okay, I'm looking in the Q&A. Okay, someone's asking about fault finding. I think you might mean failure finding, and I'm going to get to that. Okay, Ahmed said, but the way of implementation is different in FMEA and Rcm. Okay, so, you know, you can have a different kind of an FMEA. You can have a functional Fmea, or you could have a design Fmea. So if you're doing a design Fmea, that means it's going to be super detailed, right? You may even be getting down to like the nut and bolt and resistor level, because you need to make sure that that the design is right. Okay, so I get that. But if you've got a piece of equipment that maybe it is still, even it's still in the design stage, or you're about to buy a piece of equipment, or you've got a legacy piece of equipment, you can come up several levels and you can do what's called a functional Fmea. And you can write your functions based upon what it is that you need your equipment to do, right? What kind of output do you need from your compressor? So see, when you do Fmea, it just kind of stops. Now, if you're doing Fmea and you're making decisions about it, you're essentially doing the last two steps of Rcm. You're either figuring out maintenance, Or you're doing a default strategy, which is step number 7, where you might do a redesign, or maybe assign a new operating procedure or something like that. So there is no difference. Okay, Vinoth is asking about PM frequency. I'm going to get to that in a minute. The criticality calculation. Okay, we'll get to that right now too. Okay, Vinith wants to know, is it possible to develop an Rcm strategy for vessel, column, and pipelines? Vinith, you can do Rcm on anything. You can do Rcm on any machine on the planet. I've even done Rcm on a process. I've facilitated an Rcm analysis on a tech manual. One of the tech manuals for the CH-47 Chinook helicopter, I worked with them for 11 years. We Rcm'd essentially the entire aircraft. And while we were doing that, a new tech manual came out, and everyone was really unhappy with it because it wasn't giving everyone what they needed. So we actually wrote functions for what we needed out of that tech manual. And we were able to identify exactly what changes needed to be done, and we were able to send that off to management so the changes could be done. Now, one of the things you get when you do Rcm, or any improvement effort really, is when you do a formal process and you document all of this stuff, you are, for example, assessing consequences in Rcm. So it elevates and it highlights, hey, if you don't fix this, this is what's going to happen. Yes, I'll give you an example of a run to failure. Okay. Mode and failure cause both the same. Okay, Rahul, it depends on who you're talking to. Some people think about a failure mode as kind of like a first part of a failure effect. Like we could say a cause is a bearing just wears due to normal use. And then if we ignore all the signs and it seizes, some people would call that a failure mode. I use the terms interchangeably. It just depends. It depends on who you're talking to. Francisco, yes, Rcm can be applied at any level of the life cycle of the asset. And I'm going to answer that question at the end too. But let me go back before we get off track too much. Let me go back to this. And let me see, I need to share my screen. Okay, I'm going to share my screen, and then I want you to, okay, I just shared. Tell me in the chat if you can, I want to make sure you see my screen. Put a yes if you can see my screen. Nope, not yet. Yes, okay, thank you, Francisco. All right, so let's go back to this because I want to go over, let's get all this on the screen. Okay, so here we are with our failure effect. Now here's what happened. Here's what happens when you write a failure effect. I hate to say properly. I mean, this is how I was taught to write a proper failure effect to get the most bang for your buck, right? When you write this, if you write it the right way, it sets you up for the rest of, in this case, the Rcm process. But this could be so for, for any other improvement effort that you might do, because you stack this failure effect with all of this information, all of the different potential failure conditions that you could monitor. Like, I think it was John who said it. We could either monitor temperature via the DCS, or we could monitor it by actually looking at the filter, or we could do both. But we detail all of this before we get to decisions. So when we make decisions for our equipment, we are equipped, pun intended, right? The other thing is that when we write our failure effects this way, this failure effect can be a properly done FMEA can be, what you can create is a troubleshooting guide from it. You can create a training program from it. Now it's going to take a little bit of work to extract that information, but you can extract it all. And here's the other thing. How many times in your career have your equipment experts either retired or maybe moved on for a different opportunity, and all of that knowledge and experience walks out the door. This is a way of memorializing the equipment experts, all the experience and the information that they have in their brains. It is incredible. Okay, but now getting back to consequences. When we write these failure effects, if we do them properly, we should be able to very easily assess consequences. Now look at what we just wrote here. The compressor shuts down. Now we don't have adequate plant air, right? Production stops. And now at least 1,000 pounds of product must be scrapped. That's going to cost us 100K until we get the filter replaced and the compressor back up online. And now also, maybe there's a loss of cost production to being down. If so, I would put that in this failure effect too. But a lot of times we forget about scrap product that is a result of failure. So if someone could be injured or killed, or if I could reach an environmental standard, regulation, or law, then I would put that in this failure effect too. But what this does is it sets me up to go through the Ossium Decision Diagram and go through the logic. See, once you get this, the whole point of an FMEA is now you want to take each failure cause and you want to analyze it, because you need to figure out how to manage each one. Remember I said my mentor taught me that we manage physical assets at the failure mode level or failure cause. I'm using these two synonymously, right? We manage them at the failure cause level. So now we take each failure mode in our analysis and we run it through our decision diagram, right? We assess whether it's evident or hidden. Usually our protective devices are hidden. What that means is like a pressure safety valve. If a pressure safety valve sticks closed due to, I don't know, let's just say it's due to corrosion. It's stuck closed right now. Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter unless another failure occurs and the pressure increases to whatever, 400 PSI, and now the valve doesn't open. Now we've got a problem. Those are called hidden failures. And we're going to get to that in one of the questions that someone sent in. Okay, so if we go this way, then we've got an evident failure, like we do with our filter, right? Well, now we go through and we assess consequences. Could someone be injured or killed? Could we breach an environmental standard, regulation, or law? Could we adversely affect operations? Or maybe it has non-operational consequences. Maybe it's none of those. Now, one of the questions was, how do you, like we talk about risk priority numbers or doing a detailed criticality analysis. You can do that. In my experience, you don't need to do that on most failure modes, because just like this one with our filter, it's like a no-brainer, right? We don't really have to do a criticality analysis to know that we need to intervene and we need to make sure that that doesn't completely clog up, right? Now, if you've got a failure mode that has serious consequences, maybe you've got a failure mode that you don't really know what the failure effects are, then maybe you need to elevate that. And a decision from Rcm could be, hey, we need a formal criticality analysis done on that. Now, I've had people say to me, okay, there's a lot that comes out, that there's a lot of questions that come out of an Rcm analysis, meaning a working group couldn't answer it, or the organization didn't have the data to answer the questions. And people have kind of looked at me and blamed Rcm of that. But actually, that is a huge strength. And it's not just of the Rcm process, because the strength comes from the information and the questions that we're asking our equipment experts. If our equipment experts can't answer the questions, or we don't have the data to answer the questions, right? That's a huge strength, because now we've just identified what we don't know, right? Whether it's in business or our personal lives, when we don't know the dangers that are out there, there's no way for us to prepare for them. But when we identify what we don't know, then we can go get those answers and we can start to manage those failure modes. So this is the Ossium Decision Diagram. This is just a bare bones one. But let's say we've got a failure mode with operational consequences. Well, you see here, we consider condition-based maintenance and scheduled restorations, or another word is an overhaul, and scheduled replacements and default strategies, right? And just because maybe we assign a condition-based maintenance task doesn't necessarily mean that we can't also have a default strategy, right? Maybe we need better training for the technician to go do that inspection. So you can come out with everything. But do you remember how we just talked about, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. I want you to keep this in your mind as we go through this. So you see how in Rcm, the bulk of the decision diagram is figuring out what kind of maintenance we should do, whether it is a scheduled replacement or an overhaul or condition-based maintenance. Well, you see, you naturally optimize your maintenance when you do reliability-centered maintenance, because in order to assign a maintenance task in the context of Rcm, it has to satisfy two criteria. Number one, it has to be technically the right thing to do, and it has to be worth doing. Now, what does that mean? Well, if we just use our filter for a simple example, technically speaking, is it the right thing to do to go visually inspect the filter every day? Can we do it? Yes, we can physically do it. And we went through our P2f interval and we said that was 2 days. So if we inspect it every day and we can replace the filter while the compressor is still running, then that checks our box that it's technically the right thing to do. Now we need to know whether or not it's worth doing. Now, sometimes when you do an analysis, you might have to actually do a calculation, right? You might have to say like, okay, over a 10-year period, if I go do this inspection, how much is that going to cost me? Versus if I never do the inspection and I just let it run to failure. Because in this case, we've got operational consequences. So we're not talking about safety. We're not talking about risk, right? Well, in this case, this is a no-brainer, right? We don't have to do an analysis. We know we're going to be down. We're going to have $100,000 in scrap product. And what we probably should add to that failure effect that I had on the screen was how long we're going to be down for about, I think it said 6 hours. How long is that going to cost us in lost production? So we've got the scrap and the lost production. So just if I use my common sense, we're already paying the operator, right? He can go have a look once a day at the filter, or we can just have whoever is monitoring the DCS panel to have him monitor the temperature. It's obviously worth doing. See, that's the thing about reliability-centered maintenance. You're already optimizing your maintenance. You're already doing Fmea, you're already doing Fmea, you're already doing CBM, and you're already optimizing your maintenance. So, and you're assessing the consequences, because that was one of the questions. I want to talk about one more thing. And I should have separated these before. I got props I'm going to show you, but I got to do one thing to it in the meantime. But I often get asked, well, I don't know, you know what I want you to do? Let me look at the chat before I go on. Okay, someone put in the chat, I was once told that Ossium is only applicable to rotating machinery, while for static equipment, RBM, risk-based maintenance is effective. What are your thoughts? No. James, you can do Ossium on anything, anything. Waleed is telling me my voice is not okay. Could you just tell me if you can still hear me okay? Okay, you can hear me. All right, I'm smiling because of, I never rode on a Chinook that didn't leak hydraulic oil. in the US Marine Corps, the scary but very valid joke was that if the Chinook was not dripping hydraulic fluid, then you should get off and not ride it because without hydraulic fluid. All jokes aside, I think that there is also a huge miss that occurs in the purchasing arena. Yes, all of the reliability, people, process, and technology in the world can't hold up when the buyer takes a cheaper route and purchases inferior products like filters. 100%. Oh, I have a great story for you on this, James. Okay, yep. So thank you, James. You're on the same view as me. Okay. Do these look familiar? Right? I could tell you a funny story about my first foray with maintenance, but I don't know if we have time, I'll tell it at the end. But look at these. These are funnels, right? They're funnels that you use to put like oil in your car or whatever. You could use it for any kind of a fluid, so it doesn't spill everywhere. This is how I like to explain to people what reliability centered maintenance is like. Because a lot of times people say, if you do Rcm, you have to do it on everything. That's not true. Not only is that not true, but let's just say we're talking about a compressor. You don't even have to do Rcm on your entire compressor. Maybe you're having a big problem with, I don't know, the gearbox or, whatever, maybe just a certain part of the compressor. You can do Rcm just on that little bit. You could do an Rcm analysis that just has 5 failure modes in it. You could do one that has 150 failure modes in it. Reliability centered maintenance should be used to your own advantage, right? You got to figure out what your goal is, what you need to, what you're trying to get at, and then go from there. You don't have to do it on everything. So that's why I like to show the funnels. Okay. So let me see. All right, I'm going to look in the Q&A just to see. Okay, Francisco, can Rcm, and we're going to get back to run to failure in just a minute. Rcm may be applied at any level of the life cycle of the asset. Yes. Okay, let me tell you this story. This was really exciting. And I know reliability just lights me up. So when I first started learning about reliability centered maintenance, and I became an Ossium facilitator when I was a civilian employee of the Navy in, you ready for it? 1997. Don't tell anybody. I'm showing my age. I just had a big birthday. And anyway, it's been like 22 years since I first started doing this stuff. But I first started doing it as a civilian employee of the Navy. And we were doing it on support equipment. And we started with just a few pilot projects because it was in response to this thing called affordable readiness, where if you haven't heard me tell the story, this will just be 30 seconds. So I'm an intern at the Naval Air Warfare Center in Lakehurst, New Jersey. I'm fresh out of college and I'm bored out of my mind, right? And I really wanted something to sink my teeth in because I'm not the kind of person who likes to be idle or I don't like to not be doing stuff. So my supervisor called me into his office one day and he said, we got to do reliability centered maintenance. Go figure that stuff out. So how was I to know that this 10-minute meeting would set the trajectory for my life, which it did. And I'm so grateful for that day. But anyway, the story is that we started with a couple of pilot projects and we had such we got such enormously good results from it. We were able to reduce, on average, scheduled maintenance about, like, on average, about 60-ish%. Now you say, well, that's a lot. And you don't just use Rcm to reduce maintenance, but in the case of the Navy, they were way over maintaining their equipment. So there was a big opportunity to reduce maintenance. But we did an Rcm analysis on an air start unit to start jet engines on the decks of aircraft carriers. And they were in the midst of buying a new air start unit from a company in Germany. And we assembled and did an Rcm analysis on this piece of equipment that was still in the design stage. And the Navy had not even finished with the contracts for procuring it, because now we were smart, we were clued in about writing functions. And we got together a team of equipment experts. I had my air unit experts from the Navy, and we had 2 German design engineers in the room. And we ended up with like 8 or 9 design changes. And the one thing that was really remarkable, the German engineers, they kind of sat back and they said, what was so remarkable to them was that they learned about the operating environment. I mean, it's really rough. I've been really lucky to have been just as a visitor, of course, but I've been on the deck of an aircraft carrier during flight ops. It's nuts. It's loud, and this thing is moving, and it's windy, and it's just insane. So they didn't understand that operating environment. So we were able to affect that change. So you can do Rcm as early in the life cycle as possible, even in the design stage. And like I said, we started doing it on the Chinook 40 years after it was fielded. So anyway, that's the answer to that question. So, okay, so that, all right, now let's just go back. I'm going to share my screen, and I want to answer one more question, and then I want to pause it, and I want to show you something that I'm really excited about. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Let me get there. Here we go. Share screen. Okay, so one of the questions was, well, what do we do about run to failure? Well, here's the beauty of reliability-centered maintenance. There are a lot of failure modes that we run to failure in our industry, right? You know, maybe like electric motors or seals, right? I mean, a lot of times we run seals to failure, but here's the thing. When you do an FMEA, when you do reliability-centered maintenance, you assess the consequences. So what you ask yourself is it worth doing? Now, if you've got something like, let's say you can't predict or prevent your seal from failing, but if that seal leaks, then someone could potentially be hurt or they could be killed. Well, then what we need to do is manage the consequences of that failure. In other words, we have to change the consequences. Maybe that means installing a piece of backup equipment, maybe. Or maybe it means like redundancy with backup, or maybe a new emergency procedure or a different operating procedure. That's what all of this is about. That's what optimizing maintenance is all about. And that's what taking care of our equipment is about. It's really simple. It's simple. It's just not easy sometimes. And that means we need to identify each failure mode, and we need to figure out how to manage it. So I want to go back to our thing. I'm going to stop sharing, and I want to go back to this, to our people, right? And remember, so here we are, and we talked about the technical aspect, right? Well, now together today, we just talked about all kinds of stuff. Fmea, Fmea, P2f interval, potential failure condition, P2f interval. We didn't even go into useful lives, right? So the second thing about this, about the human part of, about capitalizing on our people, is that we all have to be able to speak the same language, right? Reliability has its own language, like we just talked about. So it's up to us to teach and to make everyone aware about reliability. Now, I hear a lot of times, well, I don't get buy-in from upper management, right? I don't get the money I need. They don't understand reliability. Well, exactly. We've got to figure out ways so that people understand, because if people understood, well, hey, I need these guys for a week and we need to do this analysis, and at the end, we're going to come up with an optimized maintenance program, and we may very likely be able to figure out what's causing all those chronic failures. When people understand what it's all about, then it makes it easier. Now, I know I've been doing this for over 22 years. It's not easy. You know, it's simple, but it's not easy. But we've got to try, and we've got to teach people the language of reliability. Now, I want to share something with you that I'm really excited about. And this goes back a few years ago. I was walking home from Pilates, and I take some online courses for polka. Now, I miss Las Vegas so badly, and I miss people, I miss conferences. But one of the things that my husband and I love to do is we love to play tournament polka, no limit Texas Hold'em tournament polka, and we love Vegas. And so I take some online courses to learn how to play polka better, because polka has its own language, right? It has its own techniques. If you do the techniques wrong, I mean, you're going to get beat. In the long run, you're going to get beat pretty much every time. It's just like maintenance. We have to learn the language. So I'm walking home from Pilates and I thought, if I can learn polka online, why can't people learn the language of reliability online? So I created some online reliability-centered maintenance courses, and I started with a comprehensive introductory course. If you haven't already taken it, you can go to my website, and I've got a free Rcm course that you can take. But then I have a much more comprehensive one called the Foundations of Reliability-Centered Maintenance. But what I want to share with you is my Ossium Facilitator Course, and it's all about the language of reliability and how to ask our equipment experts the right way. So if you're in a position that you think you want to implement Rcm and you want to be able to facilitate your equipment experts, or maybe you're a manager and you want to get this going and you have someone in mind who could spearhead this for you, then I've got the perfect solution, especially in the time of COVID, because it's all online. Now, I just finished a course with a bunch of my students, but and I'm mentoring them online also. But here, let me share this, because this is how we do it. We hear a lot about a reliability culture, right? How often do we hear about this in our industry? Oh my gosh, you could just search LinkedIn, or you could just go on Google and you can search it, and people talk about the culture. But the thing about the culture is that it starts with people, and it starts with people understanding what reliability is all about, understanding the language, and then asking the right people the questions. Well, there is an art to that. I actually call it the art of Rcm facilitation. And I've got another facilitator course that is starting on Monday, September 14th. So this is, I want to show you. I want to show it to you. Can you put in the chat if you can see my screen? And then don't go away, because I'm going to talk about the human side to reliability. I've got something really good to show you. So just put a yes in the chat if you can see my screen. Am I sharing the, can you see this thing that says become an Ossium facilitator? Okay, good, thank you. All right, so when you take this course, what you do is you develop these skills where you don't just understand reliability, you don't just understand the language of it, and you don't just understand the nuances, but you get to really know how to apply it in the real world and how to ask the right questions of your equipment experts. So in my facilitator course, we talk about how to plan Rcm analyses. And remember we talked about all the different funnels, right? You don't have to do Rcm on everything. So in this course, I show you how to figure out what to do Rcm on. And once you decide, how to set the scope of your analysis based upon the goal of your analysis, right? Because we've got different goals, and your goals drive the scope of your analysis and how deep you go in with your failure modes. I also teach you how to estimate how long it's going to take you so you can properly plan, right? I teach you how to facilitate it, all 7 questions of the Rcm process. So that's Fmea, Fmea, proactive maintenance and intervals, and default strategies. I teach you how to create your validation packages, how to facilitate your validation meetings, how to produce your final reports. and how to assemble all of that information in a presentation that summarizes it in a way that you can share it with upper management to get their buy-in to actually implement this stuff. Now, here's the other thing about Rcm facilitation that I want to share with you. When you're talking about facilitating, it's not just about reliability. It's about effectively managing our most valuable resource, because it isn't just about how you technically ask people the right questions, right? What specifically causes this to happen? How long between the time that you get this particular vibration signature and the bearing actually seizes? There's all of that, but there's the human component to it, right? Because we're not robots, we're humans. So in this course, you learn how to read people. You learn how to know when someone's not saying anything, what that means, right? Because when you're facilitating a group of like 6 to 8 people and everyone is chiming in, but there's one person who's silent, that's usually means that they don't agree with something and a particular detail has been missed. So this is a skill, this is a talent that you can learn, and you can not just apply to Rcm, but you can apply this talent in any meeting. You can apply it even in your personal life. Okay, 2 things. How many times have you been in a meeting where there were a bunch of action items taken or a bunch of things that people say, we need to do this, and then everyone leaves and nothing gets done, right? It's because there wasn't someone who was spearheading the meeting and responsible for keeping track of all that stuff. Now, my husband has his own business and I help out with it. And I was there last week and I was in a meeting with one of his staff members, and the staff member asked him a question, but I picked up on the fact that he was not answering her question. He was answering something else, meaning he misunderstood the question. And I looked at her and I could see her face, and her face was like, you know, she didn't want to stop in midstream, and neither did I. So I let him finish. And then I said, Dennis, I don't think that that's what Susie meant by that. I think she meant this. And Susie's face lit up and said, yeah, that's what I meant. And so then he was able to answer the question. But, you know, this is what gets in the way of our personal lives and our professional lives, where, you know, you get lines crossed, people misunderstand each other. So anyway, if you want to check this out, you can go to rcmtrainingonline.com/facilitator. We've got 20 training modules. The way this is going to go is that over about a 2-month period, we're going to do this online. I've got pre-recorded lessons, but you also, we will also do some live group training workshops. And I've got a couple of bonuses for you, because the introductory course is a prerequisite for the facilitator course, but I'm throwing that in as a bonus for this go. So we start on September 14th, registration closes on September 4th, and the class is limited to 12 people so that I can make sure I can give everyone enough personal attention. Okay, so that's enough of that. I want to go back now, and I want to come back to this human side. So remember how I talked about it's really important that we take care of our people, right? We have to make sure they understand reliability and all that, but we need to take care of people. And we are included in those people. And that means that we need to take care of ourselves. Now, in order for us to be our best at work, right? For us to be happy and productive, right? We want to go to work and we want to be a productive member of our organization. Let's give this person some hair, right? The problem is that as human beings, we are subject to invisible forces. That's what I call them. We are subject to what I call the voices. We're subject to, I hate this one. This one is sometimes the worst. The 4-letter word starts with an F. It's fear. It's awful, right? We get attacked by these things. There's inaction. There's inaction. There is overwhelm. There is, oh, this is another one, comfort. And our thoughts. Now, we don't have time to go through everything today, but I want to highlight this one today. So I call it the voices. Now, if you want to, you can put a yes in the chat. And if you don't want to, you don't have to. But let me know if you want to, I'm just opening up the chat. Let me know if you want to say yes. I call them the voices. And sometimes it's not easy to admit to it, because when we're going through it, we think we're the only ones, but we're not. Okay, it's these voices. It's like in the world, the reality of the world is that we have duality, right? We have good and bad. We have winter and we have spring. We have health and we have disease. We have up and we have down. We have rich and we have poor, right? So there's this duality that as human beings, we are always trying to balance and always trying to work with, right? Obviously, we want to be on the good part, but I don't know what it is. I don't know why it's set up this way. It just is. But the negative part of life just seems to draw at us. And you know, sometimes you hear people say, I got the good angel, and then I got like the devil on this shoulder, and they're both talking to us. How many times do you hear voices and you hear them say, oh my gosh, that was awful. You're awful. Why would you want to do that live? Nobody wants to hear what you have to say. You've already said that before. Nobody wants to hear that again. Who are you to be saying that? Oh my gosh. Do not say, like if you're sitting in a meeting and you have an idea, you have a question you want to ask, or you have a recommendation, and then all of a sudden the voice starts saying, don't say it, don't do it. You're going to look like an idiot if you do. Just do not say it, right? We got all this stuff going on in our heads. And I want to play something for you, because 2 weeks ago, I had a new roof installed on my house. Now, the video is nothing to look at, but it's what I want you to listen to, because I stayed home the whole day in case they needed something while they were fixing my roof. And it was nonstop. And by the end of the day, they worked until 8:30 at night. By the end of the day, like my nerves were all frazzled. And it's because I was hearing this all day. I'm just going to play a little bit for you. I'm playing it. Like I said, the video is nothing. It's what I want you to hear it. Tell me if you can hear this banging. All day long. It was nonstop. I'm not even joking. They started at 6:30 and they left at 8:30. Now, I compare that. That is an excellent analogy or an excellent example to talk about at least how it affects me, these voices, right? And when we hear these voices, it keeps us from doing the things that we know we want to do. It keeps us from becoming what we know we want to become. Well, I'm here to tell you that those voices are bullies. I don't know why it's set up this way, but this is the way the world is. It's that duality. But those voices are bullies. Okay, you are not what those voices say you are. So now you might say, okay, great, but how do I deal with it? Well, here's a technique that I learned from one of my teachers, and I have to use it every day, because this isn't something like once you learn it, then they never talk to you again, because they're constantly talking to me, right? As early as before I got on this live. The key is, don't identify with what they're telling you. Don't identify with it, because it's not what you are. I talk back to them. In fact, I have a name for the person who says these voices to me. So you could even name it. And I talk to this person and I say, like, enough, okay? Because what happens when you stand up to a bully, right? The best way to take care of a bully, someone who's bullying someone in school, or even sometimes as adults, we kind of get bullied, sometimes even at work. The best way to take care of a bully is to stand up to them. So if you are experiencing any of these, right, or if you're experiencing these voices, well, I want you to know the technique to use is to not identify with it, talk back to them, and know that you are not what they are saying you are doing. If you have an idea, or if you have an inspiration, or you have this feeling that you want to do something in this lifetime, whether it's personal or professional, maybe it's something you want to get done, a reliability improvement effort you want to get done at work, well, you just go for it, right? Now, the reason I bring this up for two reasons, right? Another reason is within the facilitator course, the introductory course is a bonus to the facilitator course. But not only that, I've got a course that helps us to deal with the voices, the fear, inaction, overwhelm, comfort, and our thoughts, negative thoughts, right? And I don't come at it from like this frou-frou way. It's all physics to me, right? Like our thoughts are energy. Energy has a vibration and a frequency. Anyway, I talk about all that stuff. And the reason why I've created this course is because I've gone through all this, I'm just going to call it crap, because that's what it is. All this stuff starts to attack us. These bullies start to attack us, and they try to stop us from doing what we want to do. And just like we take care of our machines, just like we can check the filter and we can grease a bearing to manage the consequences of failure, we can do the same thing with this stuff. When we can take care of our own self, then we are going to be stronger at work, and we're going to be able to be a much more productive reliability member. And I'm not talking about making lists. I'm not talking about to-do lists and prioritizing, because you can make all the to-do lists you want. You can have all the systems you want. You can have all the journals that you want. But when you've got all this stuff coming at you, it doesn't matter. We got to make sure we keep ourselves healthy in our mind and in our heart. Okay, so that's the human reliability part. So that's everything that I wanted to share today. Now, I want to go back and I want to answer the questions that I haven't answered yet. So, and I've got some on PowerPoint slides. So let me just look here. Waleed asks, is it important to attend your courses in order? Well, Waleed, you can go to here. Let me pull it up to show you. If you want to take my free Rcm course, then I invite you to do so. All you have to do is go to rcmtrainingonline.com/overview. And once you get there, you can just click on this button and you just, oh, I have to share my screen. Duh. Here we go. So this is my free course. So you just go to Rcm, that's my Boston accent, trainingonline.com/overview, and just click on this button and it will let you set up an account, and you'll have free access, and it'll be a nice overview to Rcm. Now, the next course that I have is the Rcm Foundations, and that is a more comprehensive introduction to Rcm, which is a prerequisite for the facilitator course. But when you sign up for the facilitator course, I'm including that as part of it. So that's $899 that you don't have to spend. It's bundled into it. So you definitely have to take that the paid introductory course to be part of the facilitator course. Okay, so let me see what other questions we have. Okay, James says the yin and the yang. Yes, I'm telling you guys, you know, I think that, you know, and I mean, I only work in our industry, so I guess I can only speak for our industry, but, you know, like you go to conferences and you attend meetings, and one of my teachers, the way that he explained it, it's like everyone is wearing a mask, right? Like I put on my mask and I'm the operator, or I'm the maintainer, or I'm the senior manager, or I'm the facilitator. and we have these masks on, and we have to go about our day and do our stuff. But you see, we're human beings behind all that. And you can just talk to anybody. Everybody's got a story, right? Stuff that's happened in their past, stuff that people are struggling with, stuff that people are ecstatically happy about. We're very complex beings. So it's really important that we take care of ourselves, and we take care of all these, like, these stupid fears that we have. And sometimes we let ourselves get comfortable because of it. I'm gonna do a couple more lives, and it's just going to be about this human stuff, not the technical side. I want to start talking more about fear and like overwhelm and how we manage it, because we can manage it. When we know what this stuff is all about, there are tools that we have that we can manage them. So, if that stuff is interesting to you, you can do like you could put it in as an anonymous question, or an anonymous, like a chat just to me, so no one else can hear it or see it, or you could send me an email. I would just like to know if that resonates with you, if that's something you'd like to hear more about, because I'd like to do more lives about that. Okay, but I'm gonna share my screen, and I'm gonna go over questions. So let me know in the chat if you can see these questions. Oh, no, that's not what I wanted. Let me know if you can see the submitted questions. Let me know if you can see that. In the meantime, Loic, as a top manager, I used to say, take care of your employees, they will take care of your business. 100%. 100%. And as managers, we need to take care of our people, and as people, we need to take care of ourselves. So if you're like riddled with fear or overwhelm, just know that you're not alone. I mean, that stuff happens to everybody, and everybody hears those voices too. I promise you they do. Okay, you can't see. All right, hold on. I'm going to stop sharing again. All right, tell me if you can see these questions. I'm gonna do it again. I don't know why it seems like Zoom has all these windows open. Okay, tell me now if you can see the submitted question slide. Now I got to open. Now I have to find the chat. Now, well, let me see the chat. Hold on. Oh, okay, now I see Kathleen. Okay, now you can see it. All right, let me try it one more time, because I stopped sharing, I know. Oh, that's the problem. I was sharing. Okay, Kathleen, tell me one more time. Can you see the questions? I'm sorry, you guys are gonna think I'm a nut. Kathleen, tell me one more time. Can you see submitted questions? Yes, okay, we got it. All right, so what are the first steps, aside from upper management buy-in, to implementing culture change to recognize the importance? This person said of IBM risk-based maintenance. I left the question like that because the answer to the question is just to recognize the importance of reliability in general. And I don't mean this to be a cop-out answer, but the first step is to take care of our people and teach them the language of reliability. One of the reasons why I made that online course is, even if you're not going to do reliability-centered maintenance, most of the language of reliability is embodied in that process, like we just talked about, right? So that's the first step. If your operators and maintainers don't, your operators and your maintainers need to know what a P2f interval is. And if they can't tell you what that is, then that is an excellent place to start. Now, I'm willing to bet that most of you here today would probably say that most of the people in your organization wouldn't be able to say what that is, but you're not alone. And I think this is the case in our industry because it's so simple, but it's not easy, right? Getting everyone educated takes some time. Now, it doesn't take 10 years. It doesn't even have to take a year, but it does take some effort, and it does take some time. There is just no magic bullet. There is no software program you can buy. There's no expensive CBM device that you can buy that is going to solve all of your reliability problems. It begins with education, and that's at every level, right? Because if you're, I know I hear all the time that upper management doesn't understand reliability. See, we've got to get them to understand it, because if I owned a factory and I didn't know about reliability, but someone came to me and explained, much of what we talked about today, if they explained and said, listen, you know how like maintenance and production, they're often butting heads, right? Production just wants the machines up, and maintenance is like, man, they won't even give me a day or an hour to maintain my equipment. If production understood, and not just like with saying it, but if they looked at the numbers, if they were part of the analysis, if they understood that once we gave maintenance a day, or once every 6 months a day, whatever it is, if we gave maintenance the time they needed, then they'd be able to, most likely anyway, go the 6 months until the next shutdown. See, when people know better, they do better. So this is where it starts. And it's the other thing is, like expensive software and expensive CBM equipment, all that stuff is it's cool, right? When you say to someone, let me teach you about reliability, I mean, it just doesn't sound cool, but it's the place to begin. Okay. What's the best way to determine the appropriate intervals on condition inspections? So we answered that question, right? We talked about asking your equipment experts, but now let's say you are going to do sophisticated monitoring, which I don't want you to leave and think that I don't like technology, because that's not the case. Okay, I wouldn't want to live without it. It just needs to be implemented properly. So let's say you want to start doing vibration analysis. Well, there are a lot of top-notch people out there who sell the equipment, but they don't just sell you the equipment, they help you with implementing it. So if you do want to do vibration analysis on your bearings, you just need to get with them and have them help you establish a baseline, right? This is what they do for a living. Just like I know Rcm, they know vibration analysis. They can help you develop a baseline. They can help you figure out what vibration signature is your potential failure condition. They can help you figure out what to look for and how long that P2f interval is, right? So you just have to do it the smart way. Okay. Mitigated risk versus unmitigated risk. Someone sent that in. Well, remember how when we were going through the decision diagram and we said, well, is it worth it or not? Is it worth doing? Well, what that means is it more expensive to do the maintenance or not? Maybe, maybe you don't even have any downtime when the failure mode occurs. Maybe it's okay just to run that to failure. Maybe if a gauge fails, that's okay. But that's what you develop when you write your failure effect, right? And if it really does matter, then if you can't maintain it, then you've got to change the consequences of the failure. Like I said, maybe do a backup, maybe do a put in redundancy. Oh, Waleed, thank you. Waleed says, when I attend your courses, webinars, I feel reliability is simple, but when you hear what is in the media, you feel it's complicated. Waleed, I totally understand, because I feel that way too. And that's why, if you're looking to me for all kinds of fancy equations and fancy reliability stuff, that's just not my thing. I'm a basics person. And really, the reliability, it starts with the basics. It starts with that foundation. That's really the place you've got to start. It's simple, but it's not easy to get everybody up and running and getting them educated. But I'm telling you, once they do, I mean, it's like a whole new world. I'm working with a client right now, and when we finished our last Rcm analysis, there's this one. He's a maintenance supervisor, and he's a really nice guy, but he was quiet in my working group. I mean, he participated, but you know what I let get involved? The voices. You know what I was hearing while I was facilitating? Oh my gosh, you're doing an awful job. He thinks Rcm is awful. He thinks you're awful. He thinks you know nothing. Who are you to be sitting here leading this team? I mean, I was just getting hammered, like with the roof. So one day we had to go out into the plant, and we were looking around, and I'm telling you, I mean, the fear, like this here, remember we talked about fear also? Fear was up big time for me. Like, oh my gosh, he's going to tell me this is just awful and he doesn't want to do it anymore. But I like summoned all my guts, and I used some of the techniques that I want to share with you in future webinars or lives. I don't like calling them webinars because like webinars, some of them are like snoozes. But anyway, I hope this wasn't a snoozer for you. I said to him, you know, I said, so we were walking back into the conference room after we took a tour or after we went out to look at something in the plant. And I said, so what do you think about this Rcm stuff? And I'm like bracing myself, right? I'm shaking. I'm thinking, oh, here it comes. He's going to tell me this is all awful. And he said, I didn't know what I didn't know about this machine. I've been working on this machine for 25 years, and I can't believe how much I learned about it. So anyway, it just goes to show you that that's the place to start with understanding your equipment. Okay, why isn't reliability the favorite discipline among big organizations? Okay, number one, I hate to use the word, I don't want to use that word, because sometimes Rcm doesn't seem very exciting, right? That's why I think that's the minor reason, but the major reason is because doing it right is not easy. It's simple, but it's not easy, and it takes work and it takes time. There isn't a magic bullet, and people in today's society, that we're looking for magic bullets, right? If I want to get a message to my husband, well, I just message him. If I want to maybe send a message to you guys, I send an email. It's like quick, right? We live in this world where we want everything now, and reliability just isn't that way. Okay. Here's that link. We already went over that. If you wanted to learn more about the facilitator course, here. When should Rcm be implemented? Okay, we already talked about that. You can do Rcm at any time. Why didn't us? Okay, someone asked this question. I wanted to address this. Why didn't Rcm stop our failures? He said, we're doing Rcm and RBI, which is risk-based inspections. A lot of resources have been spent from all aspects. Well, okay, it's hard for, I can't specifically say what the problem was for you, why Rcm didn't help. But, number one, it depends on, what kind of, I hate to say, like, what kind of Rcm are you implementing? Over the years, reliability-centered maintenance has been meddled with. People have meddled with reliability-centered maintenance. They've done it wrongly. They've, for example, packed way too many failure modes in at way too low a level. They end up with analysis paralysis. They don't get the results they want, and then Rcm gets a bad rap, when really they may just not have done the process the right way. Well, so that's my answer to the question, is I would have to stop back and say, okay, well, what did you do? I would have to take a look at your analysis to know if it was done right. And, that's another reason why, if you're going to do Rcm, it's really important that you have number one, you have a trained facilitator, and number two, that you do, in my opinion, a facilitated working group approach, because you got to get to the goal that's in the minds of your equipment experts. Okay, what about Ossium certification? Someone asked this. I know I'm lighting up, and the next, very soon, I have an announcement about Ossium certification, but I can't say any more than that right now. But I've got a big announcement about that coming soon. So stay tuned. So if you're not on my mailing list, go to rcmtrainingonline.com/subscribe and subscribe, so you'll be on my list. Okay, what is the best Rcm methodology? Let me get something. Hold on one second. Okay, technically speaking, there's only one true Rcm methodology, right? And, Rcm, all of these principles I talked about today, these are not new. All of these were developed 52 years ago. All of that developed and became the process we know as reliability-centered maintenance. So in 1999, and this was updated in 2009, the Society of Automotive Engineers, let's see, can you see that? They published this document called SAE, let me see where it is, right here. SAE JA 1011, Evaluation Criteria for Reliability-Centered Maintenance Processes. So all you have to do is Google SAE JA 1011. It's a very short document. This is it. It's just, let's see. It's like, I don't know, it's like 12 pages long. Well, this document outlines what an Rcm process must include in order to be called reliability-centered maintenance. So if you want to evaluate a process that someone, maybe you're working with someone on Rcm, or maybe you've got a consultant in mind to help you with that, you can just get this document and you can read it and see is what they're posing, what we should do. And it's everything that we talked about today. It's the 7 questions, and to do them the right way: functions, functional failures, failure modes, failure effects, failure consequences, proactive maintenance, and intervals. Now, they also have a document called SAEJ 1012, which is longer. It's more like, it goes into much more detail about the Rcm process. Now, if you may ask me if I can send you this, I cannot because it's copyrighted. So you have to actually purchase a copy, but all you have to do is just Google SAEJA 1011 and you can get it. So anyway, that is the Rcm that I teach, and it's the Rcm that I promulgate. It's true reliability-centered maintenance. Okay, how do you determine, I want to see if there's another one. Okay, how do you determine, I know we're over time. I'm happy to stay and answer these questions. I know we've been on for a while. I'm totally okay with that. So if you want to stay on, I'm going to finish answering these questions. If you do have to go, I will send you a replay. But anyway, someone asked this question. How do you determine failure finding task inspection intervals? So basically, this person is referring to what we call protective devices. Now, we see protective devices everywhere. I'm going to stop sharing so you can see my pad here. Okay. You see protective devices everywhere. I did a blog where when I was at the airport one time, I took a picture of all the protective devices I saw from the time I got through security to the time I got to my gate. And I don't know, they were like 12 or something like that. We're talking about like fire alarms, smoke detectors, fire suppression systems, like we talked about before, precious safety valves. I mean, there's like millions, probably millions, hundreds of thousands of them all across plants, airplanes. You know, you just sit down, like you don't need your like your seat belt, you know, the life vest that's under your seat. You know, when the flight attendant does this with the security or the safety briefing, and she's talking about the lights and the life raft, and the, you know, the card in the back seat of the pocket that gives you all of the like emergency egress instructions. All of these things are protective devices. They are intended to keep us safe in the event that something goes wrong. So with our precious safety valve, if it is stuck closed, it only matters in the event that the pressure rises to an unacceptable level, right? Well, as equipment custodians, we need to test our protective devices. You know, usually fire alarms are tested every year. Well, we need to figure out how often to test them and how we test them. Well, Ossium gives us very powerful tools. And one of the tools is failure finding calculations. Now, I know I told you I'm a simple person, and if you're looking for equations, don't come to me, but that's with the exception of failure finding. And this one equation, this is in SAEJ 1012. These equations were developed by a man named Mark Horton, who he has been so generous with me with his time and his knowledge. I have learned so much. but there are a bunch of different failure finding equations that you can use. And I just want to show you one of them. We're not going to actually do a calculation, but I just want to show you what it's all about. Because when we check our protective devices, there should be a little bit of science or a little bit of certainty behind, not certainty is not the right word. Instead of just taking a guess, we need to take a technical guess. Okay, so one of the equations, this is for one single device, like one pressure safety valve that has safety consequences. 2 times MTIV times MTED by MMF. Now don't let your eyes glaze over. We're not gonna, I'm gonna keep this simple. Okay. FFI, John Mowbray used to call it FIFI, stands for failure finding interval, is equal to 2 times the MTBF of the device, meaning how often would our pressure safety valve stick closed. MTED is how often we might need it to open, meaning how often might we have an overpressure situation. And MMF is how often are we willing to accept the multiple failure? How often are we willing to accept that our pressure safety valve will be stuck closed and will have an overpressure situation? Now, sometimes you can find MTIVs in databases, MTBFs of the protective devices. Sometimes you can't, but you can. This is part of what I teach in the facilitator course. A facilitator is taught how to get this information from people, from your working group members. But the gist of this equation is, right, I mean, the more risk like if you have a mean time between failure of your multiple failure, let's say it's 100,000 years, well, you're going to have to check your device less frequently than if this was 10 million years, right? And if you have a more reliable device, then this number is going to be bigger. So anyway, this is how we figure out how often we check them. And like I said, I'm not going to bore you with the details, but that's how we do that. Okay, let me get back to our questions, and then I'm going to go through the questions in the chat, and then we'll be done. Okay. Let me see. I hope you can see this. Let me know in the chat if you can see this. Oh, that's wrong. Oh, because this is the last one. Okay, good. This is a good one to end on. Now I can't see the chat, of course. All right, hold on. Anyway, I'm not even going to go there. The last question is this. What are the causes of mechanical seal failure in a pump, and how can this be rectified? Okay, well, here's the thing. It's an excellent question, but that question needs to be asked of your equipment experts, right? Because we can brainstorm about this, right? We can come, we know, okay, now I was sharing, that's why. Okay, now I'm not sharing anymore, right? When it comes to seals, right? Well, we know that seals, they wear due to normal use. Maybe they're installed improperly. I know I can't fit improperly. Maybe they're installed improperly. Maybe they fail because of fluid incompatibility, right? Maybe we're using a seal in a way that we shouldn't be using it. Maybe it fails because of lack of use, right? And then it dries up and it leaks. Maybe the wrong seal is installed. But here's the thing. See, a lot of people ask me, like, do I have templates for pumps or motors and stuff like that? Well, I mean, you have to be careful when it comes to templates. Your best template is your equipment experts, right? Because look at how we just very quickly brainstormed this, right? But as a facilitator, if someone tells me a seal is installed improperly, I'm going to say, what specifically caused it to be installed improperly? You know, the people in the field, they want to do a good job, right? But what if the installation procedure is wrong, or it's not detailed enough. See, a trained facilitator asks what specifically caused it and gets to a level at which we can develop an appropriate failure management strategy, right? So fluid incompatibility. Well, what specifically causes that? You know, I don't know, it's the wrong one in the manual or something like that. Or maybe it can bring to light, maybe people didn't even realize that we weren't using the best seal for our application. So that's my answer to that. Okay, those were all the questions that were asked originally. So now let me just see, I'm gonna see any last questions, and then we'll call it a day. Let's see. Okay, someone said, I totally agree with you on, James said, I totally agree with you on getting the basics right, do small, and get everyone, essential people, to speak the language of reliability. I mean, that's where it starts, right? I mean, just imagine like in our marriages, you know, sometimes it just happened the other day. I wish I could remember what it was. My husband did something and I said, what did you do that for? And he said, well, that's what you asked me to do. And I said, that's not what I asked you to do. It's because we miscommunicated, right? Now, you know, it's kind of the same even when it comes to being at work and with our equipment. Okay, what can you say about risk-based maintenance? I mean, you know, it just goes back to, you know, what kind of maintenance or how often do we do it based upon risk? So it goes back to that, is it technically the right thing to do and is it worth it? And it just comes down to, you have to identify how much risk you're willing to accept. And then you do your maintenance task at that frequency. That's just one example. But another thing you can look at is maybe change the consequences of the failure if it's really bad. Unfortunately, the leadership often missed all these simple things and want quick wins with extravagant CBM projects, overlooking the importance of training, education. I know, and that's exactly why that's why I developed my online training, because listen, this stuff has been around for over 50 years. I did not come up with this stuff. I didn't think about, I did not create it. I was actually born the same month in the same year that Ossium principles started to be developed. I don't know, maybe that's why I have such an affinity for them. But that's why I created my online training, because I felt that maybe it was because the information wasn't readily available in an easy way. You know what I mean? Like I have it all mapped out. So I totally agree with that. I mean, you know, reliability, good reliability doesn't come with a quick win. Okay, now I'm jumping in the Q&A to see if there's anything that I missed. So I'm going through the Q&A. If there's any like burning question, ask it again in the chat, because there's been a lot of traffic and I might miss it. Okay, so Pankaj says this. We have centrifugal chillers and the OEM recommended condition-based change. They do the oil analysis every year, but in the year, they top up and drain a few times and there's no trial of that. They have not replaced full oil for several years. I found the oil is turned yellow, but still not changed. Okay, yeah. I mean, you need to get with your equipment experts, and part of that is the OEM with the oil analysis, with how often you need to do that. But if you're topping off and you're doing, see, maybe you're not doing your oil analysis frequently enough, right? If we go back, like if we go to our P2f interval, is that what you said? They do the oil analysis every year, right? So if this is your P2f interval, and they're obviously, they're looking at potential failure conditions like water, you know, additive depletion. They're looking at all different specs on your oil, right? And here's failure with however you define that. Well, they're saying that this P2f interval is 1 year. Now, I can't say for sure because I don't, all I have is this one question in front of me, but maybe this 1 year is not long enough, right? Maybe you need to do oil analysis more frequently. So that could be part of the problem. CBM, should it be understood as PM inspect? Yes, so condition-based maintenance is essentially you're inspecting. You're inspecting to find or identify that potential failure condition and only do maintenance based on the evidence of need. Is Weibull analysis important to be performed for every single failure mode? No, not in my experience. Not for most failure modes. I mean, if you just take our simple example about our filter, we don't need to do any sort of detailed analysis. Now, do some failure modes require advanced engineering analyses? Absolutely. Don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that your people can tell you everything, but your equipment experts can tell you most of what you need. But there absolutely is a need for advanced analysis in some cases, 100%. PM inspections visual are considered a CBM? Yes, they are. Can Rcm be applied to every asset? Yes. Should you apply Rcm to every asset? No, not necessarily. Okay, so one person says, if we don't do Rcm on every asset, what are all the questions we need to answer to apply Rcm to an asset? If you've not done Rcm yet, just start small. Choose, you don't even have to do a formal criticality analysis. Choose the equipment that's giving you the most pain, right? The stuff that's causing you the most problems, and start there. On the Ossium Decision Diagram, for an evident failure, why are there different branches for safety, environmental, operational effects when the rest of the tree is the same? I would expect a different set of questions for safety. Okay, excellent question. Most of the questions in the 4 legs going down the column, let me share my screen. Oh. Okay. Let me know if you can see this. If you can see the decision diagram, just say yes. Anyway, put it in the Q&A because, oh, there it is. Yep, okay, you can see it. Okay, good. So, all right, so yes, so when you go down these legs, most of these questions are identical. So why do we list them all? Well, on the operational, there are nuances. There are just some small differences. Like with safety and environmental, if you say no to CBM, no to overhaul, no to replacement, then the questions within these boxes, this will say that a default strategy is required. Because if you've got a safety or an environmental consequence, you got to do something about that. So that's the small nuance. When it comes to operational, it's going to ask you the question, does the task cost less than the cost of the task and the consequences? Is that less than running it to failure? But when you're in the non-operational leg, the question is just about the consequences of the failure. I'm sorry, about the cost of the task, because if it's non-operational, there are no consequences. So the questions they're like 90% the same, but there are some differences. And the other reason is for bookkeeping purposes, because when we go through the decision diagram and we're putting the yeses and the nos in our database, we want to be able to record which one it was. So that's another reason. It's mostly for bookkeeping. Okay, Waleed wants to know what my study was. I'm an aerospace engineer by degree. I studied at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Daytona Beach, Florida. Changing the culture is very hard. I know. What's the methodology? Begin at the beginning and begin with people and start educating everyone. Okay. There's no definition for Rcm in this standard. Did you already get the standard, Ahmed? There's a definition. Is there not? I mean, if I can't find it in 10 seconds, I'll abort. right, I don't see it at a quick glance, but that doesn't mean it's not there. Oh, here it is. It's in the table of contents. I'm going to stop sharing. It's in the table of contents. Where, let me move this window. It talks about Ossium as a specific process used to identify the policies which must be implemented to manage the failing modes which would cause the functional failure, blah, blah, blah. So there's the definition. It's in the table of contents 1.1. Okay. Let's see. Okay, let me see. Okay, I think that does it. I think that's the bulk of the questions. Thank you. A lot of you stayed on even until the very end. Wow, we went 2 hours. I didn't even realize that. So, okay, so just to recap, here we go. Just to recap, and then we'll sign off for the day. What's our most valuable resource? Our people. How do we capitalize on that asset? We ask them. We ask them the right questions so that we get to all of this goodness that's in their mind, their experience, and they know all about the operating environment and the tempo and everything, right? The number 2, the way to capitalize on it is to teach them the language of reliability. So they understand the questions that we're asking them and they understand reliability. So then production understands that maintenance is not a cost center, but it's a profit center if it's done right. That's going to be another live. I'm going to do that. Okay, so remember, go to rcmtrainingonline.com/subscribe if you're not subscribed, because I'm going to do more lives, because I just think the time has come. We got to get all this info out in an easy way. Okay, and then don't forget about us as human beings. That means us as people, right? If you hear these voices, give them a name, give this person a name, make it a person, give them a name. Don't identify with what he or she is saying to you. You are not those things. Treat them like a bully, confront them, and know that you're not those things. And you just stay your course. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. A sincere thank you to everyone. I will, I'm going to download, give me until like Monday or Tuesday. I'm going to download this recording, and I'll send out the links, and I think that's it. So until the next time, I will email you when we're going to have another one. And thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend, and happy reliability. Begin with the basics. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.